The learning process is task B under area of operation 1, fundamentals of instructing, or FOIs. The learning process will explain whether or not you will remember this lesson that I'm giving. So it'll give us, the understanding of how people learn and how to apply that knowledge into a new environment. And it's important because as an instructor, it's your job to quite literally teach people. And so understanding how people learn and how to apply that knowledge is the basis for effective teaching. Now, there's a lot of definitions for, what is learning. The main one that I'm just going to focus on, and all of these are pretty similar, the main one is a change in behavior as a result of experience. We can look at another one, a change in behavior that results from expertise and practice, process of acquiring knowledge or skill through study or expertise or training. All of these definitions mean the same thing. It's a change in behavior as a result of experience. So, effective instructors need to understand the material well and the learning process and the relationship between them and the learner, realizing that learning is a complex process. We're going to talk about how it's multifaceted and assist the learner in reaching their goals while building self-esteem and confidence. That'll aid in their motivation, that'll aid in their ability to be receptive to future experiences. And as we said, experience, a change in behavior is the result of experience. And so if we have a student who's more subsequent to or more open to subsequent experiences, then they're going to learn more. So let's talk about learning theory as it applies to ground and flight instruction. Learning theory, a body of principles used to explain how people acquire skills, knowledge, and attitudes. And there's two main theories when you talk about learning theory. The first is behaviorism. So this explains behavior from an observable, measurable response to stimuli. In other words, it's really, input, output. So if I encourage my student and encourage the learner's progress with rewards, then their output is more likely to be to stay motivated and to continue to learn. Another example would be like Pavlov's dogs, where it's just input-output, where the input is they hear the sound of the bell, their mouths start to salivate because they think that food is coming, and that's the output that they get from that experience. Popularity of behaviorism has waned and has leaned much more complex than simple rewards. Basically, behaviorism is kind of the old way of thinking about learning theory, but there's some truth to that input-output, but there's more to it. And that more to it is the second learning theory, which is cognitive theory. So cognitive theory focuses on what's going on in the learner's mind. So it's not just a change in behavior, but it's a change in the way the learner thinks, feels, and understands a topic. And within cognitive theory, there's two more theories. There's information processing theory. It's basically saying that the brain is similar to a computer in the way that it receives, stores, and encodes and processes information. Then there's constructivism. This states that learners don't learn passively. Learning is a result of matching new against pre-existing information. So drawing upon previous experience. And this supports HOTS, or higher order thinking skills, in scenario-based training, which is the type of thinking required for aeronautical decision making. So in summary, there's two different main types of learning theory: behaviorism and cognitive theory. Behaviorism is kind of the old way of thinking about it, input, output. Cognitive theory is taking that step further by saying learning isn't just a change in behavior, but a change in how a learner thinks, understands, and feels. And then within cognitive theory, there's information processing theory and constructivism. So cognitive theory for higher order thinking skills and scenario-based training. Scenario-based training, it lies at the heart of higher order thinking skills. So it uses a structured script of real world scenarios to address flight training objectives. So you're using realistic scenarios that force the student to apply their knowledge. And a good scenario has a clear set of objectives, is tailored to the learner's individual needs, and capitalizes on the nuances of the local environment. So if I'm want to give a student a scenario based on airspace, so that they know how to navigate through the airspace that they fly out of, that could be my objective. Tailored to the needs of the student. So if they're a brand new private student versus a commercial student, that'll kind of set the difficulty level of the type of scenario I would give the student. And then capitalize on the nuances of the local environment. So if I'm operating under a specific class Bravo that they're going to be operating out of, or a specific question based on wherever they're doing their flying, then I can use that local environment to help create that good scenario. All right, now let's talk about perceptions and insight. So what are perceptions? Perceptions are the basis of all learning because it involves a person assigning meaning to a sensation. And then, you assign a meaning to a sensation, and that's perception. Initially, all learning comes from perceptions. So there are some factors that affect perceptions. And again, perceptions are important because the more perceptions that we make, the more we will learn. So factors affecting perceptions is our GSTEP acronym. So GSTEP. So our goal, I'll go in the order of that GSTEP acronym. Goals and values. So each student has different goals and values. Every experience is affected by their value and beliefs. You should know the goal of your specific student and use that to help motivate them, to help them draw more perceptions to learn more. Self-concept. So a positive self-concept will result in the student remaining positive to subsequent experiences. And without a positive self-concept, the learner will have psychological barriers that can limit their learning. So a negative self-concept can narrow their perceptual field and not allow them to make as many perceptions, hence learn less. Time and opportunity. It takes time and opportunity to perceive. I'm not going to tell a student, go read the P-hack we'll talk about tomorrow. They had no time and opportunity to learn it. Additionally, you're going to have to say things over and over and over again because it's not feasible to expect every single thing you say to be fully understood, and now they have that knowledge and they never need to know it again because they can always recall it. It's not feasible, so you need to give time and opportunity to students in order to learn. The next is E in our GSTEP acronym for element of threat. Threat does not promote learning. It actually narrows that perceptual field, making it difficult to perceive. If I have a student who's new to flying, who enter a bit of moderate turbulence, and they have that new element of threat, then that'll make it harder for them to perceive. When we talked about human behavior in the last lesson, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and safety and security being one of those. And so if that need isn't being met, then it makes a much more difficult environment for them to learn because they need those needs to be met before they can learn. And so that's really tying into this element of threat, right? That needs not being met of safety, their perceptual field narrows, and so that kind of explains why it's hard for them to learn. And then the last here is P for physical organism, your person, body, which senses the world. So are your 5 senses 100%? Sick, tired, hungry? If you need to use the restroom, makes it a lot harder to learn. Then we have insights. So these are the aha moments, when perceptions are grouped into meaningful wholes, and that student gets the whole picture aha moment. That's what an insight is. So we want to help students develop insights by teaching them how different topics and elements relate to each other, creating a non-threatening, secure environment where we encourage the student to ask questions, and help them acquire and maintain a positive self-concept. So how do we help them acquire knowledge? So knowledge, first of all, knowledge is just information that you're consciously aware of and can articulate. And there are different steps to acquiring knowledge. So this is our MUC acronym for memorization, understanding, and concept learning. So first step is memorization. Memorizing all the facts, allowing learners to start using information even if they don't know what it's used for. So like babies will learn the ABCs without knowing what it's for. Maybe you have your student memorize the airspace rules and regulations without knowing what it's for yet. So not good for problem solving. A baby that just can sing the alphabet can't start, putting sentences together and chatting about. Understanding, so that's the second stage, is when the learner begins to organize knowledge in useful ways. So a learner who understands, the purpose behind the procedures attain this level of knowledge. So if we're staying on that airspace example, I could say, they memorization, they learn the airspace rules. When they reach the understanding stage, they can explain maybe why the airspace rules are the way they are. So, why we can't just fly through, enter Class Bravo airspace, like why we need that clearance. That would be the understanding stage. Next is the concept learning stage. Group objectives, ideas, people, etc. that share attributes. So it's where you know how to solve problems and make decisions. So let's stick with this airspace example. Maybe I have a student make a flight plan for cross country, and they're using their knowledge of the national airspace system and airspace rules to help them create their route, right? So they're using their knowledge to solve problems in a larger context. So these are the steps in acquiring knowledge. We have some laws of learning. So this is our REAPER acronym, REEPIR, REAPER. So provide insight into what makes people learn most effectively. So this is what helps people learn. So this is an extremely important slide. Definitely have this memorized. Have all these acronyms memorized. But anyway, the first is the law of readiness, the R in our REAPER acronym. So basic needs of the learner are met, and it poses, are you mentally ready to learn? No, it's not, I have my pencil sharpened, I am good to go. I've got all my equipment with me, I've got my headset, I've got my checklist. It's, are you mentally ready to learn? So learners must have a reason to learn, so that to ensure them that the lesson will help them achieve their aviation goal. So you should communicate clear set of objectives, tie that into their specific goal, get them motivated to learn it, and then they'll be mentally ready to learn. Next, law of exercise. Basically, this one's pretty simple. Practice strengthens connections, disuse weakens it. So the more a student practices and tries to learn something, the stronger the connection will be. And then the opposite is true for disuse. It'll weaken it. So if you have flying with a student who hasn't flown in a few months, you can expect some rest. So that's all based on the law of exercise. Next is the law of effect. Behaviors leading to satisfying outcomes are repeated. So in plain English, learners need success to have more success in the future. Failure would hinder it. So this also aids in motivation. I'm not going to be teaching power off 180s, and expect a student within commercial ACS standards on their first flight. They're not going to be able to do it, and that failure can potentially allow them to become discouraged and never want to do flight training ever again. So in the context of flight training and flying with people new to aviation, I want to give my students attainable goals so that they can succeed, so that that success can lead to more success in the future and aid in their motivation. P in our REAPER acronym is primacy, the law of primacy. The thing learned first is best retained. So what's learned first creates a strong, almost unshakable impression. This is a bit of a double-edged sword because if learned incorrectly the first time, it's difficult for that student to relearn. So teaching things, properly from the onset of flight training, proper radio calls, proper procedures, proper checklist usage, whatever. I, law of intensity. Vivid, dramatic, or exciting experiences teach more than a boring experience. When I first did I've flown, solo so many times now, and anytime I fly solo, recently I don't remember the past couple times I've flown solo. I don't know what I did, but I know exactly what I did on my first solo in my first solo cross country because it was a vivid, dramatic, super exciting experience. And so that law of intensity, that exciting experience led me to remember that. I still remember that to this day. Additionally, you can also look at this from a different angle and think like learning from real world scenarios is best. Like I would learn, and a student would learn maybe doing a maneuver like ground reference maneuvers better in the real thing, in the real aircraft, rather than receiving a lecture about it or learning it in the simulator. Because it's much more exciting, vivid to do it in the actual aircraft than hearing a lecture about it. And then the last is law of recency. What you've learned most recently is best remembered. So if a student, again, hasn't flown in a long time, like we talked about for the law of exercise, safe to say they forgot a lot and are going to be rusty. So those are the laws of learning. If you, on your CFI check ride, the examiner wants to talk about the learning process, 1,000,000,000%. They're going to ask you about the laws of learning, want you to explain it and give examples. Let's talk about the domains of learning. We talked about the laws of learning. Now let's talk about the domains of learning. So this is our CAP acronym for our cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. So our cognitive domain is our thinking and knowledge domain, right? Deals with content knowledge that will develop intellectual abilities and skills. Next is our affective domain. So this is our feeling and our attitude towards learning. So it deals with your emotions towards education. It's difficult to measure, but motivation and your enthusiasm are important for learning. And last is our P in our CAP acronym for the domains of learning. It's our psychomotor domain. So it deals with our physical movement, our motor skills, so learning to fly, and approach programming a GPS, learning to have proper back pressure when you're doing a steep turn. It's the doing domain. And we have 4 levels of learning. So this is our RUAC acronym, also a very popular check ride topic if you get the learning process on your CFI check ride. So the 4 levels of learning in that RUAC acronym is: first is rote, the ability to repeat without understanding. So memorizing the steps of a steep turn. Knowing that, okay, I have to roll in a 45 degrees of bank, maybe add 200 RPM, add a swipe of nose up trim, and you just know the steps. Next is the understanding level, which is grasping the nature of something. So knowing why we increase our angle of attack in that steep turn, and you can explain why you're doing these specific things. The next is our application stage, so applying something that is understood into use. So I'll stick with this steep turn example. I can explain why I lost altitude in the steep turn when I let my nose fall through the horizon as I entered that 45 degree bank. That would be hitting the application stage here. Next is the correlation stage. So knowing how elements correlate with other topics. So now I would understand how bank angle could potentially affect load factor, and how bank angle affects stall speed when I'm maintaining altitude, and and vertical components of lift, and how that could translate to other maneuvers and procedures. That would be that correlation stage. All right, let's talk about characteristics of learning. Learning should be purposeful, a result of experience, multifaceted, and an active process. So this is our RAMP acronym for our characteristics of learning. So one, result of an experience. Remember, without experience, you'll never learn. Remember, what was the definition of learning? It's a change in behavior as a result of experience. So provide learning experiences that are meaningful, varied, and appropriate to the learner. And the A in our RAMP acronym is an active process. Learners won't remember 100% of what you teach them, so you have to constantly engage them, and they'll need time in order to digest and interpret that information. Learning is multifaceted. So we learn, individuals learn more if they fully exercise their minds and feelings, verbal, conceptual, perceptual, emotional, and problem-solving elements all together. So it's multifaceted. There's a lot of different ways to learn. Additionally, we learn with more than one sense. The more, the better, and we'll develop different attitudes about a subject while we learn. And the last of our RAMP acronym for the characteristics of learning is P for purposeful. Everyone has different intentions and goals. We have to find ways as instructors to relate teaching to the students' goals, to aid in their motivation, to keep them wanting to learn. Acquiring skill knowledge. So there's different stages in skill acquisition. This is our CAA acronym. Cognitive, associative, automatic. I'll kind of breeze through these here. So cognitive stage, they memorize the steps. Associative stage, they possess the ability to assess their own skill and associate individual steps and performance with likely outcomes. Then automatic, the skill becomes automatic. Multitasking at the automatic stage becomes more possible. They can carry out the skill with a high degree of competency and skill. Students having the result, knowledge of their results is good because students may not know how to correct wrong actions, and if you inform them right after a performance while it's fresh in their mind, then they'll know how to improve. We can develop skills by continual practice with the student. Progress depends on repeated practice. The power law of practice states that practice improves performance, and running into learning plateaus are normal. So if this line is indicating, and this is like the amount of time or number of times we practice, this line is, how much the student learns. Eventually, students will run into a learning plateau. So a learning plateau is just usually a phenomenon where there's a period of initial rapid growth, and then there's a period of time where that growth slows down and seemingly comes to a halt. If they're normal, they should be expected after an initial rapid growth, like beginning flight training. So how do we help a student through a learning plateau? Well, we can move to a different side of the curriculum to help them regain confidence before then coming back to another area. Explain to the student what a learning plateau is, explain to them that it's normal, and a learning plateau can be induced by overpractice. So if we're doing steep turns and they're starting to get it, all of a sudden they hit this learning plateau. If I keep trying to hammer steep turns, they may stay at this plateau forever because they're just so beat up about the fact that they can't do it. So move to a different area of the area of the syllabus, redevelop their confidence in themselves. And when we were talking about the laws of learning, remember, one of the laws of learning was law of effect, which was learners need success to have more success in the future. So if I'm continuing to hammer the steep turns that they're struggling with, then they're going to fail. Think that they can lose motivation and then potentially give up. So that's why in a learning plateau, your goal should be to attempt to instill confidence back in your student. That should be the goal. All right. Excuse me. All right, so that was learning plateaus. Now, there's also different types of practice that you can do with students. So there is deliberate practice. So deliberate practice is practice aimed at a specific goal. Definitely want to avoid distracting the students and give feedback when we're doing deliberate practice. So this could be aimed at maybe one specific aspect of a maneuver. Maybe we're just practicing entering slow flight, or we're practicing forward slips, something like that. Next is blocked practice. So this is doing something over and over and over again until it becomes automatic. This is good for short-term memory, but poor for long-term learning. So it doesn't really train long-term learning. And the last is random practice. So it's practice that mixes skills. So you practice this, and then you practice this maneuver, and then this maneuver. It's better for long-term memory, and this is the type of this is what we get on check rides. Is they're just pulling maneuvers and landings and procedures from left and right, and testing your long-term memory, your long-term knowledge on that. Acquiring skill, knowledge, evaluation versus critique. So, evaluation versus critique. Evaluation is, it's judging a student's ability to perform whatever maneuver, procedure, or knowledge that they have, and it's geared towards the instructor. So I'm asking myself, am I getting through to this student? Are my teaching techniques working? So it's evaluation is kind of like a test. Critique, on the other hand, is ensuring the student's skill is the skill or knowledge or procedure or maneuver is practiced correctly. And critique kind of has a negative connotation with it. You think it's like, it's always like negative feedback, but really critique is just advice for how to do better. So initially, practical suggestions are more valuable than a grade. So that's the critique. Critique is more valuable in the beginning of flight training. And again, it has a negative connotation, but if you replace the word critique with just giving them advice and feedback for how to how to be better, same thing. Overlearning of knowledge. So the advantage is you have this application of knowledge, and it's more efficient and streamlined to teach, but it can reduce critical thinking and impede further learning. And application of skill. This learner needs to understand the skill so well it becomes habitual. They also need to be able to recognize situations where the skill is appropriate to use. So instructor actions explain that the key to acquiring and improving skill is continuous practice, monitor practice and provide immediate feedback, so that's that critique, avoid conversation and distraction, especially when learners are practicing skills like we were talking about with that deliberate practice. We want to avoid distracting students and give feedback, give critique, and explain that learning plateaus are common and normal, and if they continue to practice, they can continue to improve. All right, distractions and interruptions. We touched a little bit on, how distracting a student during that deliberate practice and in the onset of flight training is not good. Distraction is just unexpected events that cause the student's attention to be diverted. So as an instructor, I can use distractions to test the student's ability to cope with or decide whether a given distraction is worthy of their attention. Really training them to have that pilot into command mentality. And interruptions are unexpected events where a student stops one task to complete another one. This is a significant source of errors. So watch your students' eyes and their head to see where they're looking. An example, ATC issues a landing clearance while your student is doing their before landing checklist. They recite the clearance back to ATC, but then they fail to continue the checklist items. So that's why interruptions are a significant source of errors. Next is fixation and inattention. Again, watch the eyes and head of your student to see where they're looking, to see if they're fixating inside the aircraft, if they're fixating on one instrument, or if they're not paying attention to a specific thing, like keeping their eyes outside, which is extremely common in flight training. It can occur when learners are bored and don't find a task important. So we can help students overcome inattention by instilling motivation in them. But at the end of the day, if a student doesn't want to learn, then they can't learn. There's things that we can do to encourage them, but the student has to meet you halfway. So identify the problems by following where your students are looking. There are different types of errors that students could make. There's a slip and a mistake. A slip is, you plan to do one thing, but you do another. Like you try to do the right thing, but you accidentally do the wrong thing. And a mistake is you plan to do the incorrect thing, and you're successful in doing the wrong thing. So slips will happen, and, through practice, they're going to stop making slips. The accuracy of them making a slip, or the tendency of them to make a slip, will go down. And mistakes need to be fixed. The mistakes can't happen. So how do we reduce errors? So we can, learn and practice. Practice makes permanent, so higher knowledge and skill will always result in less errors. Taking time, so slowing down. In aviation, we will never want to trade speed for accuracy in an airplane. Checking for errors. How do we do this? Checklists. We have checklists for a reason. They work. Use your checklists. Using reminders. Setting a timer or bugging a heading or an altitude as a reminder for where you're supposed to roll out on X maneuver. The next is check for errors, use reminders, develop routines. Routines can become habits, and that habit can help prevent a specific item from being missed. And raising awareness. If you call attention to an error that a student makes, then they're made aware of it, and that'll reduce the likelihood of them making that mistake again. So don't let the error snowball and cause additional problems. Communicate with the student. Talk them through the different steps of how they can reduce an error. And you, as in the instructor, should instill them to practice. Tell them to slow down. Tell them to use their checklist, use reminders, bug their heading and altitude, or whatever they need to do, and we'll help them develop routines. And then we'll raise awareness to the issues that we see them making so that we can reduce the errors. So learning from an error, ask them why the error happened and what they could have done differently. This will promote them to utilize that higher order thinking skills and force them to apply the knowledge of what the error was and how they can do better. So allowing them to figure that out for themselves will make that more instilled in their memory than you force feeding what happened down their throat. Memory. So let's talk about memory. Our memory is just our ability to encode, store, and retrieve information. We have different types of memory. There's our sensory, short-term, and long-term. Sensory is the part of memory that receives stimuli from the environment and processes it. So our reaction to, you hear a fire alarm, you get tense and you jump up. Or an aviation example could be hearing the stall warning horn and then immediately teaching the students to do our stall recovery procedure. Short-term memory, information that's stored for about 30 seconds, then fades or goes into long-term memory. There's that time and capacity limit, and repetition can help retention. So, example short-term memory would be a clearance you receive from air traffic control, and you read that back. I can't remember when I flew last week, and I got whatever clearance. I don't remember what it was. That was in my short-term memory, and then it faded. Then we have long-term memory. Training should be meaningful enough to reach long-term memory. It's relatively permanent storage of unlimited information. And, that's long-term memory is information that we don't forget and we can retrieve. But sometimes we do forget. And there are theories of forgetting. So this is our REFERS acronym. R is retrieval failure. This is when it's like at the tip of your tongue. What are the weather, visibility, and cloud clearance requirements for Class D airspace? And you're like, what was it? 5152. God, what is it? It's at the tip of your tongue. And then maybe it'll just come to you, 3152. Next is interference. So this is when an experience overshadows what you're trying to learn, and the learning has been, interfered with. So other memories interfering with what you're currently learning. So if I'm driving, someone else's car, and I hit the brake and I smash my head on the windshield pretty much because that person's brakes is a lot more sensitive compared to my car, that would be an experience interfering with what I'm currently trying to do. So that's interference. F is fading, the gradual deterioration of memory over time. If you're not using that information, it can fade over time. So not disuse of certain of the information will weaken that connection over time. So, that kind of ties back into one of the laws of learning, or that law of exercise, where the connection is strengthened after we use it. The opposite is true if we don't use it. And then repression and suppression. So memory is pushed out of reach. You don't want to remember feelings associated with memory, so it's pushed into our subconscious. So that's more of a defense mechanism there. So this is how we retain learning. We'll use our Mr. Lamp acronym. So you can think, what was the acronym for retaining learning? It was like a light bulb above my head. What was it? Mr. Lamp. There you go. So that's our acronym for retention of learning. The M is meaningful repetition. 3 to 4 repetitions provide maximum effect. So I can't say something once and expect my student, again, to just know it perfectly. It's an active learning process. And so I'm going to have to, a lot of repetitions. Recall is prompt by association. Items associated with one another can promote retention. Maybe I'm like, what was that VFR instrument? The instruments required at night. What was that acronym? It was like wing. No, it was like flaps. There you go. It's by association. So that's why those acronyms like flaps is really helpful. Those mnemonics, which we'll get to mnemonics in just a couple lines here. Learning with all 5 senses is most effective. Learning with more senses is more powerful. Attitudes. A student with a positive attitude will retain more information because they want to learn. A student that doesn't want to learn, has a negative attitude, won't learn as much. Mnemonics, using a word or phrase to remember long and complex information. There's so many mnemonics. So these acronyms within aviation, I've already said, maybe 7 or 8 of them so far in just this presentation. 8 tomato flames, grab card, flaps, arrow, aviate. There's a million mnemonics, but they're there for a reason. They help in aiding memorization. Praise. Praise stimulates remembering. Students will want to hear you praise them. So if they do a good job, they want to be seen for the effort and work they're putting in. And so if you praise them for remembering, they're going to want to hear those words out of your mouth again, and that will increase their motivation and eventually or additionally help them retain that learning. Now we'll talk about transfer of learning. So the ability to apply knowledge from one context to another. We want to promote a positive transfer, so plan for it as a primary objective. Learner understands information can be applied in other situations. Maintain higher order learning standards, avoid unnecessary rote learning, provide meaningful learning experiences, use material to make relationships clear. And so this will cause students to form habits. Forming habits will insist on correct techniques that'll reduce their errors. It'll additionally follow the building block concept of continuing to build their skills and habits and knowledge. And understanding, memory is greatly affected by the level of understanding. The more you know and the more expertise you have on the topic, the greater understanding you're going to have. And remembering, consistent practice and gaining a deeper understanding is important. So what to remember during training is consistent practice. Having students fly at least 3 times a week. A student that's only flying once a week is going to have a lot of repeat lessons. It's going to be a waste of time. They're going to forget things, and they're not going to get their license fast at all. It could take them a long time. It's going to waste time and money. So encouraging students to have consistent practice, combine repetition with efforts to increase understanding. After training, continue to practice knowledge and skill. Even after I get my flight instructor license, or tell a student after they get their private instrument, commercial, their CFI, whatever, they have to continue to practice, and they still have to continue to learn. So they can use different sources of knowledge, like an instructor, me the instructor, books, videos. YouTube is amazing for sources of knowledge. I've learned honestly most of my information in aviation on YouTube videos. And encourage real-world experience. So summary of instructor actions is difference between short-term and long-term memory. We want our training to enter students' long-term memory by motivating them to want to learn. Explain the effect of frequent and recent usage of knowledge. If they use knowledge frequently and recently, they're going to know it better. That information is not going to fade, and that connection is going to be strengthened. Explain the effect of depth of understanding. We had these different stages of learning. Remember that the levels of learning of our rote, understanding, application, and then correlation stage. So we want to get students to that correlation stage. Encourage use of mnemonics. So this helps with that complex information, using a word or phrase to memorize that information. 8 tomato flames, Northwest craft, the million mnemonics within aviation. And the benefits of studying at regularly spaced intervals and disadvantages of cramming. If this one is so huge, especially for cram studying for a check ride. I think students on the day before their check ride shouldn't be, honestly, take the day off. All the work that you've done, all the studying should have been done beforehand. Cramming is not going to be doing it for you. Even if it's just 30 minutes a day, you're just studying or you're reading something new, and you do that over the course of a few months, that's going to serve you so much better than the same amount of time studying, but it's all crammed. You're not going to know the information as well, and it's not going to serve you in the long term because you're kind of cramming all that information into really short-term type memory. Even if it is in long-term memory, it's going to be disused if you don't continue to study after you potentially even pass or fail that check ride. It's not going to serve you. Risk management concepts, we'll talk about lack of motivation. It's the most dominant force governing progress and learning ability. I've definitely been in flight training, and I've had different stages where I'm super motivated and I'm studying every day and I'm doing a great job. I even at one point, made this huge flashcard set, and I had about like 500 different flashcards. It was this huge pile, and I'd go through the flashcards every single day. But I also had times where I had a lack of motivation. I'd go months without flying and studying, and my progress, of course, hindered because of it. So positive motivation is that promise of achievement or rewards. Maintaining motivation rewards students' successes, present them with new challenges, let them know how that specific ground lesson or flight lesson will help them achieve their goal, and that will aid in their motivation to get that specific lesson done, or to learn that skill, learn that knowledge, learn that maneuver or procedure, whatever. Drops in motivation are natural. There's learning plateaus, and when they don't have that success that they were achieving beforehand, that rate of success, then their motivation can potentially drop. Flight training isn't easy. I do think that most people can do it. A lot of it is just, are you willing to put in the time and effort? In general, the knowledge that goes into flight training isn't difficult, but what is the volume of information. And so that's why not cram studying and just studying at least a little bit each day is extremely important. There's that 6-to-1 rule in aviation where you have to study for 6 hours and fly for 1 hour. I don't know if it's that drastic, but there's some truth to that. Meaning you'll get a lot more out of your flight training if you do all your ground knowledge studying on the ground versus doing it all in the air. Remind learners of their goals and reasons for training. So back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, lack of motivation could also be from a student not having these basic needs. So if a student has this, all of a sudden they lost their house and now their safety and security is gone. Now that basic need is not being met, and it's going to make it harder for them to learn. Same thing with physiological needs. If they're hungry, they need shelter, sleep, food, water. That makes it harder for a student to learn. Again, even if it's things like love and belongingness or self-esteem, if they don't have those needs, then it's going to be harder for that student to learn. So help students satisfy their needs in a manner that will create a healthy learning environment. Inadequate or incomplete instruction. So inadequate instruction can lead to apathy in learners. And apathy can potentially lead to a student losing faith in their instructor. They lose motivation and could potentially give up. So talking down to a learner is one of the fastest ways to lose confidence. So provide well-planned, appropriate, accurate instruction, and come prepared. Know what you're talking about when you come into that lesson plan. Maybe you're going to teach aircraft systems in a ground lesson. As an instructor, go through the lesson, practice teaching it the day before, and that way you're coming in extra prepared and well planned for that lesson. All right, that is about it for the learning process. There was a lot to cover in that. We talked about learning theory, perceptions, insight, the laws and domains of learning, characteristics of learning, acquiring skill, practice, evaluation versus critique, errors, retention of learning, how we forget things. There's a lot that goes into the learning process. It's probably the largest FOI, but it is extremely useful and important information. So as far as learning the fundamentals of instruction, just know these acronyms and be able to speak in plain English about this on a check ride. I know I kind of gave it in a really conversation or a lecture-based format, but on a check ride, you know, the instructor would say or the examiner would say something like, you have this one student who you've been flying with for 2 weeks, and they're struggling. They had started their flight training, they're learning a lot, and all of a sudden they start struggling with their steep turns, and they're also a student pilot that you've noted as having the resignation hazardous attitude. What are you going to do with this student? So they'll ask like realistic scenarios like that. So just to give the example for that one, I can let them know, hey, well then they're probably in a learning plateau. I would explain to that student what a learning plateau is, explain to them that it's normal, and then we'll go to a different side of the curriculum and work on something else. Additionally, if they have that resignation hazardous attitude, I want to instill confidence within that student. So I would, maybe their ground reference maneuvers were good. And so I'd say, okay, well, we'll stop doing steep turns. Let's go do some ground reference maneuvers. And then that gives them that success. And then if we go tie that back into our laws of learning, one of the laws of learning was the law of effect. And the law of effect states learners need success to have more success in the future. Failure hinders it. So if I would have had them do steep turns over and over and they kept failing, then they could have lost motivation, eventually lose interest in flight training and give up. Of course, learning promotes, practice helps learners, but in a learning plateau, over practice can induce that learning plateau. And so that's where we'll just take a break and then we'll come back to it later and then practice that later. But really focusing on installing confidence in this specific student. That's how you would want to answer a specific question like that on a check ride. Anyways, that was the learning process. So area of operation 1, fundamentals of instructing, section or task B.